Hi, I'm Rachel, and this is my MLK Weekend 2025 AM reading update. Just a couple of days after this long weekend. Here we go. I am less than a week after my last AM reading update, and I'm making some progress, which feels pretty good, but as always, my TBR list seems to be larger than the amount of time I have left in the month. But we'll just keep on keeping on, I guess. And in the meantime, here's what I've been up to these last few days. I'm continuing to read through the latest collection of Bass, the Best American Short Stories, the 2024 edition that's guest edited by Lauren Groff. Definitely got to pick up the pace if I want to finish this one this month. But anyway, this week I read the short story Jewel of the Gulf of Mexico by Selena Gambrell Anderson. And so this is a short story about a father-in-law and a son-in-law. And like, ostensibly speaking, it's a story about kind of what to do about life when it's not living up to your expectations, I guess. And the general answer seems to be stay mad and collect weird shit. That's more or less a line from near the end of the story. The son-in-law recently left his job as a jeweler because he wasn't, moving up the chain fast enough, and he did not like his boss. But meanwhile, his wife is pregnant, and so, it's not the best time. And at his own birthday party, the father-in-law, Uriel, decides to, give a pep talk to his son-in-law. Well, kind of. And he does it on, the father-in-law is actually, a famous rapper, and he has some patents, and so he's like throwing his weight around. And another thing he does, his collect weird shit thing, is he collects lots of slave memorabilia from, U.S. antebellum history, including a real slave ship that they're, sailing through the Gulf while they're having this conversation. It's kind of weird to follow because, we're mostly inside the protagonist's head for the whole thing, and it's just, about the anxieties of trying to connect to this man, and also they're just sort of, one-upping each other and talk, and it's just hard to sort of, I don't know, be real about what you want and what you need, and I feel like that's part of what the story is about. But, they're posturing so much, and they're so both, in a way at odds with the world or upset with the world in different ways. They have these grudges that in a way I don't think necessarily the writing necessarily makes all that sympathetic sometimes. But then, another sort of, crazy thing that happens, or maybe not so crazy, is the ship is falling apart. There's a shipwreck with this, old ancient slave ship that, is falling apart around them, and Uriel's like three interns that are also helping him man the ship, which I guess isn't too shocking because none of these people actually seem to be nautical experts either. But it also seems, it's one of those dramatic story climax conceits. So, I kind of like the idea of a father-in-law and a son-in-law talking about, pissed off that life isn't exactly what we want it to be. Even like for this rapper guy who, seems like, he has a lot going for him, but you always find things to have a chip on your shoulder about, I guess. And it's sort of about trying to find your way through that morass. But it's, I don't know. She made interesting choices specifically about where to go with that. I also finished Happiness by Aminatta Forna, which was my page 112 pick for January, and a book I've been, it's been on my radar for a while, ever since it made it high in the BookTube prize a few years ago now. And I really did like this book. I think in a way there's also a lot going on, and that sort of, took my focus away sometimes, but when it was really working, it was working. We're primarily following two protagonists. Jean, she is an American living in Britain to do a study on foxes. She's basically this, she's a biologist and a naturalist who's made her, professional name, in studying the habits of animal groups, like especially like in urban areas. Like she's had some, or suburban areas in the US too, and right now she's doing a study on urban foxes in London, and also kind of like trying to get over a divorce. And then Attila is a man who is from Ghana, but he has, some history in London, like he had some schooling there and has some family who lives there, and also has power of attorney for a old colleague of his who actually has early onset dementia. So yeah, there's a lot going on. And then we even, before even getting into Attila's backstory, like, well, he's a psychologist and he's technically supposed to be here for a conference, although he really barely does anything for this conference except at the very end where he sort of delivers this speech, which is his pronouncement on, the realities of what it means to be alive versus, to be afraid of any sort of trauma or conflict. And he himself has a lot of backing in trauma and conflict. He actually primarily works in war fields and trying to work both with like warlord sort of figures and with civilian populations who have been traumatized by warfare. And so the two of them meet in London by chance, in a way, like they run into each other literally, and they ultimately are able to start up a relationship, and it's just really nice to follow. These are two people that are somewhat of outsiders to some conventionality, and they're just trying to find their way. It's a book about sort of displacement and being outsiders and sort of the realities of evolution, if you would, like, why it is that foxes live in urban areas, and what's the reality of human migration to different places because of displacement due to refugee status and other acts of like global politics. And after a while, a lot of the people we're following in this story about London, none of them are native Londoners. So it's like you're really getting this picture of a different sort of city, and the idea that a city isn't, set in stone, and that, migration is just a reality. And Forna even, goes into all sorts of things, like there's, settings in here, like overgrown graveyards, so we can ruminate on the reality of what happens when people leave an urban setting, or we talk about parakeets who also aren't native to the city, but have staked out a claim, and etc. It's all sometimes a little much, but usually I'm kind of able to go with it because it's sort of about fleshing out the personal interests and environs of Attila and of Jean. And in general, this doesn't have to be too plotty of a story, but one of the major plot points, I guess, is when Attila's niece and great-nephew are in trouble. Like, first they're taken up by, I guess, immigration, but that turns out to be some sort of mistake. And I think, in a way, in service of the plot, Forna puts the mother in the hospital where she really can't, do much or help, and her son is in foster care, but he runs away. And it's Attila and Jean and a band of, predominantly African and other nationalities, people who like work, as security around hotels and other buildings, or as street sweepers and other sort of I wouldn't say odd jobs, but sort of the foundational jobs of of taking care of the city, the people who are most overlooked. But they're the ones who like come together and become this sort of friend group looking for the boy, and then they continue to check in with each other. So it's just about like the found families in a way that people find along the way, and Attila and Jean are growing closer and then romantically close, but by that point you kind of know that things aren't going to stay that way for forever. Like, maybe Jean will settle down in a permanent way in London, maybe. It seems like that's a possibility, but Attila definitely is going back to Ghana as his home base, and he's going to continue to, do work for, the UN, like therapeutic work in war zones. So, it's this, I guess, understanding in a way of transience in relationships too. But at the end, there does seem to be some hope about, when you do move around the earth this much, maybe, you'll cross paths and find each other again. And so I thought that it was just the relationships were moving, and there were really interesting ruminations on different migration patterns for humans and other animals. But also, I think it was a little too chock full of some subplots, and it was just kind of a little overwhelming and hard to keep track of that way. I guess it's maybe the Victorian affectation of some novel writing, although it doesn't necessarily fit modern storytelling mores. Another book I finished over the weekend is Outwitting History by Lansky. This was my December of 2024 page 112 tag pick, so I'm happy, of course, to get this off my TBR and also off my shelves because it is a well-loved borrowed copy from a friend, so I guess it'd be good to get this back to her. And silly that in a way that I put this book off and now it's like turned into my first 5-star read of the year, which I guess is unsurprising given some of my most recent 5-star books, which have also been nonfiction about the Jewish experience. And this one is about well, Lansky is roughly my parents' age, and he is the founder of the Yiddish Book Center, which came like at a pivotal moment, I suppose, in American Jewish history. Yiddish as a cultural and phenomenon or language was kind of dying off in a way. You know, the only populations that really spoke it and continue to speak it with lots of regularity are the Hasidim, but they use it solely in a religious context, whereas sort of the different secularized cultural forms of Yiddish expression, they all, you know, thrived in Europe. And I mean, a huge majority of Yiddish speakers were killed in the Holocaust. And those who came here, like my ancestors, you know, there was this whole push to assimilate into American mores, and that basically meant like taking Judaism and only seeing it as a religion, and in some ways even the religious aspects of Judaism were capped and altered sort of for Protestant mores, but that's sort of a different subject. But you know, the idea of cultural Yiddish faded, and you know, generation to generation Yiddish wasn't spoken with you know, new children anymore, and there wasn't really any new Yiddish culture happening. You know, I don't think there's writers anymore who write in Yiddish. I mean, if there are, it's rare. It's not part of modern culture anymore, modern Jewish culture, but it's certainly a big part of, well, Ashkenazi Jewish past from Eastern Europe. And during the late 70s and early 80s, Lansky is this, for the most part, stereotypical American Jew who also didn't really know Yiddish, but he decided, like, if he was going to wanted to study Jewish history and, you know, Ashkenazi history, he had to learn to really understand them. And this led him to the quest with other, you know, colleagues to try to save Yiddish books, because they were starting to flounder. I mean, like, the owners of these books were dying off, and the books were often, you know, neglected or destroyed. And so it started as a really small thing of, like, saving Yiddish books from being put in the dumpster by, you know, grandkids who don't care about them, but also, you know, as this becomes something of, like, you know, a hobby almost, but then it becomes a nonprofit, and he becomes the founder of the Yiddish Book Center, and he's saving Yiddish books from all sorts of places, libraries where they're going to be discarded, and going to, you know, communist countries insofar as he can, from Cuba to the USSR, to, well, like from Cuba especially, to sort of save the books. And then after the Iron Curtain lifts, or starts to lift in the USSR, he's actually bringing books to Jewish communities there that want to reconnect with their heritage, and that becomes a big part of it. And, you know, this book in a large part chronicles ultimately, like, it starts with like a one man with a truck sort of deal, like picking up old moldering boxes of books, and then it talks about the realities of what the Yiddish Book Center is all about, because that's what this all becomes. And how they're trying to, first they're collecting the books, and then they're trying to, you know, garner interest in academic settings so that, you know, people can study them. And, you know, by this point, you know, more and more people are getting interested in studying Yiddish. It is something that, it's, coming back to life, as it were. And it's also about his, exploits in, digitizing, moldering copies of books that, are falling apart. And then this gets into the reality that I went into, library school once upon a time. And I actually, I am a contractor at the Library of Congress, so I'm fortunate enough to have some access to one of the other major repositories of Yiddish books at the Library of Congress. Or, I mean, I mostly, in a small way, I actually work with older Hebrew books, but actually not with Yiddish necessarily. So, there's this geeky, like, for anyone who's interested in sort of library culture and the preservation of books, this is pretty fascinating to see about how, abandoned books are able to be restored, and there's a resurgence of interest in that cultural reality. And that does then get him, like at the back end of the book, he's like making more pontifications, I guess, about the reality of Yiddish in Jewish history and how it was understood at the time, like, lots at the time, Yiddish culture, mostly started with the Enlightenment, really. Like, before the Enlightenment, I don't think there was necessarily as much writing of, certainly of fiction and poetry and that sort of thing. And also, Jewish Ashkenazi culture wasn't nearly as secular. I mean, there were secular movements that happened after the Enlightenment. And that's when, Jewish socialist and Jewish communist and Jewish Zionist and all sorts of Jewish groups were starting to crop up, and they were all, writing in Yiddish because that was their, that's the predominant language of a lot of Ashkenazi Jewry. So he ruminates into, what these books and meant to those people versus how they're understood now, and he gets into pontifications about the realities of American Judaism, which I was already, sort of in eagle-eyed mode about, because I read Joshua Leifer's take on where American Judaism is now, and sort of of what our past, present, and future look like. And now Lansky's trying to say, well, this is where Yiddish fits into it all. I still feel like I wish both of those authors maybe gave a little more credit to Jewish culture as it is in America today. There's a weirdness to think that, it's only about Yiddish, when Yiddish really is something that in large part is mostly about understanding the past rather than about moving into the future. But I do, I agree with them that studying the past is very important. I'm just, it's, as somebody who's invested in Jewish history and Jewish culture and in Jewish books and libraries, obviously I feel a lot of warmth about what he was able to accomplish and what he put down on these pages about what he and his organization were able to do, and, how something so sort of scramble at the beginning could become such a, important nonprofit, a couple decades later. Oh, and I really want to go to the Yiddish Book Center now. That'll, I guess, have to be maybe a vacation I should start planning sometime in the future myself. Next, I'm making incremental progress through The Bee Sting by Paul Murray. Returning to the BookTube Prize, this was the fiction winner for last year, so I did not read the fiction finalist ballot, so I figured I'd try to see what I think of the winner overall of last year's prize. Hopefully I'll finish before we get to this year's prize, but I am moving very slowly through this chunkster. This is a story that takes place in Ireland. I think we're following a family during the recession, and their own, fortunes are starting to fade. I've just basically finished the first section of this, where Cass, the teenage daughter, is the POV. Her father had some well-to-do garages in the area, but they're starting to close down, and the family is really starting to, shatter. I don't know if that's too extreme, but things are in flux. The mother is, angry and resentful in her ways, and and they're also sort of the talk of the town in a negative way about, their failing fortunes and, Cass's dreams of, maybe going to Dublin for school, they're in jeopardy because how can we pay for it? And so between this and some other, subplot issues with teachers, she's feeling very disaffected by the adults in her life, and this is when she's starting to follow her friend Elaine into, drinking at the pub and, making out with boys all the time, and it seems like their education is sort of starting to slide a little, and they're focusing more on, this drama with with boys and men and with drinking and that sort of thing. And so we're following very, in a way, kind of bitter, cynical characters. But she is, Cass is, I guess, finding a place mostly with her friend Elaine. Elaine is sort of, becoming a, what she's focusing on mostly right now. And it's giving her some sense of, I guess, excitement or something. You could see some toxicity going on there. But, it's a wry sort of take, I guess, on what's happening to, well, first with Cass, and I think we're going to move on to other members of the family and talk about the devolvement of the family, but also it seems like we might go into more speculative thinking about, like, going back into the past to see what could have changed to make things better for them, maybe. But anyway, I'll need to find the time to race through the rest of this, I hope, before the end of the month, and I will report back. Another book I'm in early days of is Our Deadly Designs by Kalyn Josephson, which I'm listening to on Audible. This is the second book in a YA fantasy duology that started with this one, This Dark Descent. This is a book that takes place, or a series that takes place in a secondary world filled with vying noble families in an empire that seems to be ever expanding and waging war to look for magical resources. One of the major cruxes of their society is this magical horse race, which was a significant part of the first book, where characters got together to try to backstab each other in the background, and also, in the foreground, they're, putting, their favorites together as jockeys on these magical horses in these races. And one of the major points of that was that there is a Jewish cultural group in this world that's called the Kinnish. They're kind of reviled and had been, taken from their homeland and their magic stolen and yada yada, and now some of the remnants live in the capital city, and they have a type of magic that is separate from the magic of the main group and can kind of go undetected in a way. Like in these horse races, one of the characters makes a golem horse, basically, that's undetected as a magical horse. And so that's their way of trying to win the race. And so these characters are getting together. We're following a jockey Makira, whose family owns a ranch, and they're in jeopardy from one of the nobles who wants to take over the ranch. And then Ari is the Kinnish girl who knows golem magic, but also wants to, get more in touch with her ancestry. And there seems to be, a curse going on with her and her backstory too. And then we're following their patron, Damien, who also, I think, comes from a part Kinnish background, and he is from a lesser noble house trying to maybe move into a more, move his house into an even better situation. So he's doing a lot of the political backstabbing. And so the second book, we're just, picking up with where we left off the last time, with characters sort of ruminating on where their statuses are now, and there's been, broken bonds of trust and all of that, and there's a lot of characters to follow. So hopefully I'll get back into the world again, and I will report back. And that about covers it for me now. I think I've beat most of the sun beating in on my face so that I'm not completely washed out here, hopefully, but it's probably a good time for me to go and get ready for work, alas, and hopefully get this video up later tonight or maybe tomorrow. But there are exciting bookish things coming up. Well, imminently, the Jewish Book Council is going to announce this year's winners and runners-up of the National Jewish Book Awards, which I'm always excited about, and I like making a video highlighting the books that speak to me out of that list. And then there's my author's answer video that I try to do monthly, answering questions about reading and writing from J.D. Archer's question list and writing group. So I'm hoping both of those videos I'll get out within the next handful of days. So stay tuned for that. I hope you're all staying safe and healthy out there, still thinking about the impact of those devastating fires in LA. And meanwhile, here on the East Coast, we're dealing with snow and cold weather, and now it's getting icy, so it's kind of a different world. But alas, I gotta go into it to get to work and hopefully not slip. We'll see how it goes. But hopefully I'll be back here to report back in the future, and I hope you will be too. Thanks so much for watching, everyone, and I'll see you next time.